Well, hello everybody. My name is Jason DeCosta, and thank you for joining me today on my show called Consistent Preterism. Hope you all are having a wonderful day. Today I wanted to talk about Revelation chapter 3 and just go over a few quick thoughts and connections from that chapter. And quick word on my audio yesterday, which was perhaps the shortest Bible teaching in the history of man. That is the teaching that he came only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And I just wanted to touch upon it a little bit because obviously yesterday was just sort of like a joke, just to kind of get people to chuckle. But it really is kind of a silly argument if you think about it. People say, well, sure, Jesus came only for Israel. Sure, he came to save those under the law. Sure, he came to give repentance and forgiveness of sins to Israel. Sure, he came and was raised up as Savior for Israel. Sure, he was the end of the law to all those who believe. Sure this, sure that, sure this. Sure, he said, go not into the way of the Gentiles, but go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. All these... Yeah, but then there's always that huge, big old, fat, juicy, apple bottom butt, all right? And the point that I wanted to make in that funny audio yesterday is that there are no buts, okay? There are no buts. You cannot say that he only came for Israel, but he also came to do other things, because the Bible doesn't say he came to do other things. The only way that one can arrive at that conclusion that he came to do other things beyond what he said he only came to do is to mess up the story like most of people have done over the last centuries, right? The only way that you can do that is to misunderstand who the Gentiles who were being saved were, and who those same Gentiles were who were appointed to eternal life, and who were dead in the trespasses of being uncircumcised in the flesh, who were dead in the trespasses of the law, who were dead in trespasses and sins, living out in the nations, paganized, worshiping false gods, not worshiping Yahweh, and who were fulfilling the promise that Moses made at the beginning in Deuteronomy 4:27 and forward, where in the latter days the Israelites would be out in the nations, paganized, not worshiping Yahweh, dead in trespasses, but then God would turn and have mercy upon them and remember the covenant that he made with their fathers. And that's precisely what we see Paul reference in Galatians 3, where he says to them, and if you are Christ, it's because you are Abraham's seed and an heir according to promise. So the reason why they were, the reason why they were heirs according to promise is because they were Abraham's seed. And that's fulfilling Moses' promise that God would later on remember the covenant promise that he made to the fathers, and he would have mercy on these law-neglecting Israelites, pagan Israelites, aka Gentiles. Again, if you were not a Jew, you were a Gentile. If you weren't practicing law, circumcised, and abiding by the commandments, you were a Gentile. Okay, so when Paul says he's going to the Gentiles to preach the gospel, he is doing so because he's calling in the lost sheep. He's calling in the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He's going to the nations, okay? Not for the purpose of saving the nations, but for the purpose of saving those in the nations, calling those out from the nations who needed to be called out. All right, and we saw that the other day when I shared, last week I shared that teaching on Revelation 14. We see the song, the redemption song that only the 144K were allowed to sing and only they could learn, showing clearly who those being redeemed from the earth were, the 144, aka the 12 tribes of Israel. But in Revelation 5, we see what the words to that song are. And the words to that song could not be more clear. They specifically say in Revelation chapter 5 that we were saved out from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred. These are the 144,000, aka the 12 tribes of Israel, being saved out from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred. All right, so when the promise is made to Abraham in the beginning that in his seed or in his descendants all these nations would be blessed, that is precisely the fulfillment of that promise. But it wasn't that these pagans were being saved and were inheriting the promise. It was his actual people from the nations, from the tribes, from all tongues, being gathered back in through that great commission, which, as Jesus said, was to go out to the ends of the land to gather in his elect from the four winds of the earth before he came. Okay, so that was the Great Commission, and that was what this was all about. But the point of yesterday's comical, short, 30-second audio was to address this whole argument. I had somebody comment recently and say, well, yes, of course he came for the lost sheep of Israel, but that's not all he came for. And you just have to chuckle a bit, because that's exactly what he said he came for. And honestly, that's only what he came for, because he says he came only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Only. All right, he makes a very clear, exclusive statement there. He didn't say, I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, but there will be others who come in as well. No. The words Gentile and the words people and the word nations and the word ethnos, that has really caused some great confusion over the years as to who they were actually gathering in through that gospel mission, which was believe in Jesus, the Savior of the brethren, and be forgiven of your trespasses. Be redeemed from that curse of the law that Paul said was the curse and that only Israel had. So just wanted to touch upon that before I got into Revelation chapter 3 and wanted to give you a little further insight into that. But on to Revelation chapter 3. This isn't going to take very long. I know many of you follow me and listen to my audios daily. And first of all, I thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I'm not the type of person to do audios for any kind of financial gain. I barely even mention the books that I've written, although someone told me that my Kingdom of Christ book is on Amazon selling for $825 now, and I kind of laugh, but really all that means is that there's only one copy of it left out in Amazon world through like the dealers and whatnot. Obviously, Preston, when he heard I went to Consistent Preterism, he removed that from his book collection and book sales. So there's only one left on Amazon. So $825, folks. Get it while it's hot. But in all seriousness, if anybody out there wants that Kingdom of Christ book, where I write from the position of inconsistent preterism, you can order it from me. I don't have many copies left. I may have 4 or 5 copies left. And I would give you a good deal on it. So if you're interested, shoot me an email, comment, let me know, and I'll reach out to you. But also the Genesis of Israel book, might as well plug that one here while I'm talking about books. That's available on Amazon. Keep in mind that was when I was not fully consistent. I was still clinging on to a kingdom that only had the 12 tribes written on it, and only allowed entrance into by way of the book of life, which was opened up at the end of Israel's days. So I was also still very inconsistent. In the Kingdom of Christ book, I was probably 90% inconsistent. In the Genesis of Israel book, I was probably 50% inconsistent. And now I believe that I am 0% inconsistent with my latest developments. But if you want a Genesis of Israel book and you don't want to pay the price that Amazon pays, initially when I wrote that book, I ordered a few hundred copies of it because I had a bunch of followers on Facebook, and I wanted to personalize each book and sign it and get it out for them, just because that's what people were requesting. It wasn't that I wanted to puff my ego or anything, but I just wanted to give them a little bit more of a personalized copy of it. So I ordered a few hundred copies, and most of them are sold, or were sold, I should say, within the first few months of actually releasing that a year or so ago, a little over a year ago, I think. But anyways, if you're interested in that and you don't want to pay what it's asking on Amazon, I probably have 20 or so copies left in my possession, so maybe 25. So if you're interested and you only want to pay about half of what Amazon is asking, you can PayPal me that. It covers the cost of the book and maybe covers shipping. I'll have to look at the numbers again, but we'll have to see. So if you're interested in either one, let me know. Like I said, I don't have many of the Kingdom ones left, but maybe like 4 or 5 of those. But anyways, the point is that I don't do this for any kind of gain. I don't do it for recognition. I'm not out here monetizing my YouTube videos like other preterist teachers do on YouTube. Basically, they monetize where they earn money for everyone that watches an ad before, during, and after their YouTube presentations. And if you get a good amount of views, you can actually make a little bit of money. I mean, we're not talking gangbusters here, unless you're talking, dozens upon dozens of thousands of views each video. But, you might be able to earn a car payment throughout the month if you're producing regular videos. But that's not why I'm in it. That's not why I'm here. And I won't be doing that. So my appreciation comes by way of your comments. Or I should say, how I feel appreciated comes by way of your comments and also by way of your likes, which it seems like many of you are starting to engage more in that regard lately with the likes and the comments, and I really appreciate it. So if you like what you hear and you enjoy it and you enjoy my efforts, I do really appreciate your likes and your comments. So please continue to do that. I really enjoy it, and it sort of drives me to continue to do it. Obviously, if you're making videos and nobody's engaging, nobody's hitting the thumbs up button, you can kind of lose motivation pretty quickly. So you guys have given me reason to continue, showing that you are enjoying the content and you're, for the most part, seem to be in agreement with it. But as I was, what I was getting to here is that many of you follow me and listen daily, and you have seen how I've developed places like Revelation 7, Revelation 14, and the 144K, specifically in Revelation 7, where the 144,000 are being sealed on the forehead. That is my belief in that, is that it's the gospel going out, sealing them with the Holy Spirit for the final inheritance that was soon to come, which is why they, and they alone, were in the last days. And so they're going out, they're sealing the 144,000 of all the 12 tribes on the forehead. And then in verse 9 of that, we see that inheritance picture where this great multitude that John now sees is standing there from all nations, tribes, tongues, which I believe is just symbolic of them going to the nations to seal the 12 tribes wherever they were. And now they're standing before the throne in heaven, crying out with palm branches, clothed in white, all perfected, forgiven, like angels in heaven, crying out, salvation belongs to our God. It's sort of like the victorious last picture of them in heaven having received their inheritance. And if you notice, the 12 tribes are nowhere in sight there. It's just the great multitude from all the nations. And that is because that is the 12 tribes. They were gathered in from all nations, everywhere that they were at. Just like Paul says in Romans 11, when the fullness of them come in, all Israel would be saved. So Israel was all around in the nations. And when the fullness of them came in, all Israel would be saved. And it would be at that point that Jacob's Redeemer, aka Israel's Redeemer, would come out of Zion and take away their sins and start a new covenant with them, and so on and so forth. So just keep that in mind, that the picture of that great multitude has to be the 144K. Otherwise, the 144K of all the 12 tribes of Israel did not receive that inheritance, right? Only the great multitude from all nations is shown as receiving that inheritance, and the 12 tribes are nowhere in sight. So either the 12 tribes did not receive the inheritance, and they were just sealed on the forehead for no reason in the beginning of Revelation 7, or they did receive the inheritance, and that great multitude is, in fact, the 12 tribes of Israel. So, anyways, back to Revelation chapter 3, where I just kind of wanted to connect some things. So, assuming we agree, right, on the fact that the 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel were the ones that were being sealed and redeemed out from all the nations, just like Revelation 14 and Revelation 5 so clearly state. They were the only ones who could sing the redemption song. They were the only ones being called out from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred. Right? It makes no sense for every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred in a general sense to be the ones being redeemed when Revelation 5 says that the 144K were being redeemed out from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred, which proves my point that this was a direct mission to go out to the nations, to go out to every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred, and gather in the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It was pulling them out, fishing them out. They were fishers of men. His sheep would hear his voice and come. But Revelation 3, I'm just going to kind of skim over it and make a few notes. John is writing to the angel of the church in Sardis to begin. Now, obviously, the 7 churches of Asia, people would look at that and they'd say, no, these are foreign churches. These are churches out in the nations, right? And church, obviously, is just called out ones, right? We tend to take a really modern day view of the word church in Scripture, when really it's just the called out ones. And so the argument would be that these are foreign churches, right? These are foreign churches. But really, these are not foreign churches, because these are the same lost sheep that are being called out from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred. And they just happen to be located in these regions, right? So John's writing to the church of Sardis, and he says, be watchful and strengthen the things which remain that are ready to die, for I have not found your works perfect before God. Remember, therefore, how you have received and heard. Hold fast and repent. Therefore, if you will not watch, I will come upon you as a thief, and you will not know what hour I will come upon you. You have a few names in Sardis who have not defiled their garments, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. He who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life. Okay, but I will confess his name before my Father and the angels. So the Revelation 7 picture that I just spoke about and that I've taught about many times is what? It's the great multitude from all the nations, right? And what are they doing in heaven in verse 9 and forward when they've received that inheritance? They're standing before the throne, crying out with palm branches in joy, saying salvation belongs to our God. But the key here is they are clothed in white. Okay, they're wearing white robes that's symbolic of them being clean. Right? Now, if you agree with me that obviously these are the 144K of all the tribes of the children of Israel, then you also have to agree that these ones in Sardis, these elect in Sardis, are also the 12 tribes of Israel, the 144K. Because look what they're doing. Or look what John says to them. He says, he who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life. So that's just an interesting connection that I think proves this point even further, is that the 12 tribes, 144K, are of course the great multitude shown standing redeemed, having inherited their promise, clothed in white in Revelation chapter 7. That is a final fulfilled salvation picture of them in heaven, okay, having received the promise. And here, John is telling these ones, before that happens, before the coming of the Lord, he's telling them, he who overcomes and he who holds fast until the end shall be clothed in white. All right, just an interesting connection there, same people. And then he speaks to the church of Philadelphia, where Rocky Balboa was from. He says, these things says he who is holy, he who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens. I know your works. See, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Indeed, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. Indeed, I will make them come and worship before your feet, and to know that I have loved you. All right, so again, these ones, John is making a comparison, but why would he say it that way? These ones who say they are Jews and are not. Or these ones who say they are Israel and they are not. Because remember, in that day, in that time, the Israelites were called Jews. So that's why I've mentioned before, it's somewhat tricky and you have to be careful, because Israelites were out in the nations, okay, and they were many times referred to as Gentiles, like Romans 11, Romans 9, etc. These were the ones who were not practicing Jews. They were dead in the trespasses of the law. But then also, the Jews were called Israelites because those who resided in the land of Judea were Israel, right? That was the nation of Israel in that day. But look what John says. He says, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews and are not. So what I believe he's saying is that the ones he's writing to are Israelites, right? They're the true Israel. They're the true Israel of God, like Paul calls it in other places. All right, not all Israel is Israel, said Paul. So he's writing to the true Israel and saying, I will make those who say they are Jews and are not worship before your feet and know that I have loved you. Okay? And that's the same for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. All right, and then speaking of world, look what he says. Because you have kept my commandments to persevere, I will also keep you from the hour of trial which is coming upon the whole world. The whole world. All right, so if we're consistent in our understanding of world, unlike the full Pret who says, yeah, world means globe here, but over here it just means the covenant world. But if we're consistent, we know that the hour of trial that was coming upon the whole world had nothing to do with foreign nations. Nothing at all. Okay, it had to do with Israel, Jerusalem. Okay, it was going to be destroyed by the hands of the Roman armies. Old heaven and earth was going to pass away. It was going to be burned up in fervent heat. And that was the hour of trial that was going to come upon the whole world. All those of the covenant. That covenant system, that covenant order, that heaven and earth was going to pass away. Every jot and tittle. Obviously includes the law. So, again, the hour of trial which shall come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the land. Behold, I am coming quickly. Hold fast to what you have, that no one may take your crown. But he who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. And I will write his name on the city, the New Jerusalem. So, again, we know that the New Jerusalem had the 12 tribes of Israel written on it. Right? But look what he says here. He says, he who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and I will write on him the name of my God, the New Jerusalem. All right, which comes down out of heaven. And I will write on him my new name. Now, the full Prets love to say, oh, look at it. This is coming down out of heaven. It means it's coming to earth. It's coming down, literally coming down. But you notice how they love to take the literally coming down portions in this most symbolic book of Revelation, which is talking about great dragons falling from the sky, falling from the heavens, all sorts of things, 12-headed beasts, whatever. They love to take the coming down strict wooden literal here. But when it comes to all the catching up passages that are mentioned not even in a symbolic book, but in letters like Corinthians, Thessalonians, where Paul is writing about things that were going to happen to them, where they'd be caught up in the clouds, or where they were waiting for that upward call, right? The dead will be raised and we will be changed and caught up into the clouds where we will forever be with the Lord. No, that can't be literal, right? That's got to be symbolic. But the coming down has to be literal. So you see, it's sort of, they decide what's literal and what's not. In my opinion, the coming down out of heaven is just a vision, just like everything else in this book of Revelation. Okay, and I wouldn't put too much stock in it. Okay, what I would put stock in is the non-symbolic books like Thessalonians, Corinthians, Romans, Galatians, which talk about this glorious upward call, Philippians, all right, this catching up into the clouds where they would be like angels in heaven and would never die anymore. That's where I would put my stock because of the body of evidence and proof. But anyways, the point here is that they would have the name of the New Jerusalem on them. And we know from Revelation 21, I believe it is, right, whose names were written on the New Jerusalem. The 12 tribes of Israel. So it makes no sense in Revelation 21 to talk about the names of these ones being written on the New Jerusalem, having that name on it. And then all of a sudden here in Revelation 3, these ones in the Church of Philadelphia are not the 12 tribes, but true foreigners. It just makes no sense. Consistency is key. He says he would write the name on them and on the name of the city of their God, the New Jerusalem. And that is the same name that we see written on the New Jerusalem in Revelation chapter 21. And if you go look at that, guess who it is? It's the 12 tribes of Israel. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to read was verse 14 and forward, just breezing through it. Not all of it, but to the church of the Laodiceans. He says, these things I say, the beginning of the creation of God. I know your works, that you are neither hot nor cold. I could wish that you were cold or hot. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Because you can say, I am rich, have become wealthy, and have need of nothing, and do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. Okay, now keyword naked there, right? What does the naked mean? Is it literally Johnson hanging out? They had no clothes on. These people were walking around butt naked back in the day in this church of Laodicea. Johnson's blowing in the wind, right? Is that what naked means? Well, in the garden, many people believe that's what naked means, right? Literal naked, butts out. All right, but then look what he says in verse 18. He says, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, that you may be rich. And here it comes again, white garments, that you may be clothed. So again, if the white garments in Revelation 7, at the end, at the inheritance, are speaking of the 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel, standing before the throne, crying out, salvation belongs to our God, then who's John writing to in the church of Laodicea? He's telling them about that they might be clothed in these white garments. And then he says that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed. Okay, now, that's where I'm going to stop for a minute. So he's talking to these ones, and he's sort of, chastising them and saying, hey, look, you guys are lukewarm. You're screwing up, right? And he's saying, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, that you may be rich, and white garments, that you may be clothed from that nakedness. And then he says that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed. Now, would anyone in their right mind read that book or read this chapter of Revelation and think that John was literally talking about butt naked, Johnsons blowing in the wind, boobies hanging out, okay? Pardon my French, but I'm just trying to get you to visualize these Christians, so-called church members in Laodicea, walking around the cities 2,000 years ago, completely buck naked. Okay, was that what John was referring to here when he says that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed? Of course not. Of course not. This is metaphoric imagery and symbolism being used, figurative language being used to speak of, the fact that these ones needed that forgiveness. These ones needed that mercy. These ones needed that blood to wash over them and cover them. They needed those white garments because they were dead in trespasses. Their sins were like crimson, but Christ was going to make them whiter than snow and cleanse them. So that's what this nakedness refers to. And notice the word shame there is tied to the nakedness. Okay, that their shame of their nakedness may not be revealed. But again, the key here is nobody in their right mind would think that this is literal and literally referring to nakedness. Heck, the futurists think that this is future. Most of them. They think that the Church of Laodicea is some future scenario, or that it represents all people today. Okay, so if that's the case, Mr. Futurist, who takes the Garden of Eden literal, and who takes the shame and nakedness of Adam and Eve literal, as in butt naked, then are people walking around today in the Church of Laodicea butt naked and ashamed? No, of course not. So there's no consistency. In the beginning of the story, the shame and nakedness of Adam is literal. And in the end of the story, the shame and nakedness of those in the Church of Laodicea, who many confused futurists say is us today, right? You've heard it. I've heard people say that these represent ages and we're in the age of the Church of the Laodiceans. It's just so stupid, right? But nobody's walking around butt naked today, ashamed for it. Neither was Adam and Eve in the garden. That is not what that is speaking of. It's highly symbolic, highly metaphoric imagery. Their eyes were not literally shut. They were not sewn shut. Okay, they weren't born with an eyelid defect, and then suddenly their eyes were peeled open, okay, when they sin. No, that's not what it's saying. That represents consciousness, all right? Guilt, shame, guilt, consciousness. They knew of their guilt when they transgressed the law, because the law brought knowledge of sin, and it opened their eyes. It gave them knowledge. It illuminated it. It gave them wisdom, and it brought the death. It brought condemnation and guilt. Okay, they knew that they should be punished, and that's why they needed a covering. And that's when the whole animal sacrifice system began, which was initiated for the people of God to take away sin. All right, so, but the point here that I want you to take away from this in closing is that the shame and nakedness of the Church of the Laodiceans is never understood and never interpreted as a literal shame of being butt-ass naked. But everyone, just about everyone, when they start off reading the Bible, they believe that Adam and Eve should be interpreted in such a way. Well, that doesn't work. It just does not work. Okay? These are figurative concepts, imagery, metaphor. I think you get the point. And then he goes on and he says, to him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches, aka to the called out ones. All right, so again, just kind of a mixed bag of information today on this audio, but just wanted to throw those things at you to see how beautifully it all connects to the 12 tribes of Israel. Right? Revelation's a tricky book. It bounces around. You got different things going on. Many times you have a look at things in the past. You have a look at things that were going on when John wrote roughly a decade before the end. And then you have John referring to things that were going to be theirs when they inherited the promise, such as Revelation 7, verses 9 and forward. They're in heaven singing, praising, saying, salvation belongs to our God. And our God, folks, is Israel. How many times did Yahweh say he is the God of Israel in this story? Again, hundreds. I am the Holy One of Israel. I am the Redeemer of Jacob. Right? I think it's 1 Chronicles, maybe chapter 17 or chapter 21. He says that I am the God of Israel, the one nation whom God went to redeem from all the nations of the earth. I could have misquoted that, but it's literally saying that Israel was the one nation whom God went to redeem out of all the nations of the earth. 1 Chronicles 17, maybe 21, I don't know. I'll write it in the notes or in the comments of this when I share it. But point is that the God of the Bible is always calling himself the God of Israel. So when they're crying out with palm branches saying salvation belongs to our God, who do you think they are? They're Israel. It's the 12 tribes standing redeemed, clothed in white. And again, just in closing here, last thing I'll say. What I'm teaching here may not be believable to many people, right? You may not like the idea of a literal calling up, even though you accept all the miraculous and supernatural stuff elsewhere in the Bible. For some reason, you reject that, even though you accept that Christ literally ascended into heaven, into the clouds as the firstborn of the brethren, but you can't accept that the rest of the brethren literally ascended into the clouds when they would, quote, be like him when he appeared at the end for them. You can't accept that for whatever reason, God only knows. But my point that I'm trying to make here is that whether or not this story is true is beyond the point. You don't have to believe it. I'm just teaching it for what it says. Okay, I'm just being honest with what the text says. This is what the text says. There's no spiritualizing it. There's no, being caught up into the clouds with the Lord. Yeah, that just kind of means like spiritual joining together with him. Yeah, that has nothing to do with literally being like angels and never dying anymore and never marrying again, like Jesus said in Luke 20. He didn't really mean all that. He was talking about the Levirate marriage law. No, he said they do not marry there. Okay, flat out. Had nothing to do with the Levirate marriage laws. Jesus' answer was very clear. Where they're going in the age to come, there is no marriage, because they're like angels in heaven and they do not die anymore. So again, you may not like what I say. You may not agree with a lot of it in terms of the supernatural or the conclusion statements and, them inheriting their promise. And you may try to spiritualize that to mean, just some invisible imaginary kingdom where people still die. None of what was promised is literal. But I'm just teaching the Bible for what it actually says, and that's my whole intention. Whether or not it's true is another story. Who knows if it really happened the way that the Bible says? But that is indeed what the Bible teaches. Anyways, I thank you all for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day. Not sure if I will share anything else this week because it's Thanksgiving. And it's sort of a busy time, and then I go away for a week almost immediately after Thanksgiving for some work trips, so who knows when the next time I'll be back is. But I thank you all for joining me, and if I don't speak to you before Thanksgiving again, I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving with your family and friends, and go Redskins. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.